Greetings from Nairobi, colleagues, from the UNEP headquarters here. We're very delighted to welcome all of you to this second webinar in a series of webinars on this very important and interesting issue of sargassum. First of all, hope everyone is keeping safe during these challenging times. We have more than 500, nearly 600 registrations for this second webinar, and currently I can see the numbers increasing. We've just crossed 200 participants online, so very warm welcome to you. This webinar is, as I mentioned, a second in a series of webinars. The first one was in May, where we had over 700 registrations and actually 500 people were on the line for that webinar. But today, this second webinar is a partnership between UNEP and our colleagues at IOC-UNESCO, where within UNEP, especially our colleagues in the science division taking the lead, since the focus of this webinar is on the science of sargassum, as well as the ecosystems division, and that's where I come from. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm with the UNEP Ecosystems Division, and within the Ecosystems Division, the GPA program, which is a program on land-based marine pollution, and specifically the Global Partnership on Nutrient Management. Within IOC, we have our colleagues based in Cartagena, as well as we have our colleagues from the GESAM, the experts group on marine pollution, as well as the global harmful algae blooms. So it's a great mix of colleagues that have put this webinar together. The webinar today is divided into 3 parts. The first part is opening statements. The second part is detailed presentations. We have 3, in fact, focusing on the science of sargasso. Second is monitoring sargassum from space. And third is turning hazard into opportunities. So 3 very exciting presentations, followed by interactive discussions. I strongly encourage you to put in any comments or questions in the chat box. We can take up with the speakers. So without further ado, let me pass on the screen to my colleague, Hartwig, who is with the UNEP Science Division and coordinating our global environmental monitoring systems. Hartwig, over to you.
Thanks very much, Mahesh. First of all, can you all hear me well? That sounds good, or looks good. Thumbs up, that's fine. It's good to be reconnected. So Cesar, we've been working actually, I think 15 years ago with IO Caribe when I was doing LOIC's work, which was land-ocean interactions. And I'm very glad and delighted to be able to give you some opening remarks on that. I mean, on behalf of the director of the science division, but actually as UNEP in its entirety. I think this is about an environmental issue. And I was thinking about how do I start actually. It's pelagic sargassum. What does it actually mean? It's a global issue seeking regional solutions. And I mean, we've been calling this year 2020 super year of nature. Then it became super year of COVID. It became super year of humanity, and it's now getting all together. But what is at stake this year is to think about climate and biodiversity in its connectivity. And it is the two that get out of imbalance or get into imbalance, and that's what we see here reflected. So what was supposed to happen in Climate COP was a renegotiation and an upscaling of the national determined contributions to mitigate and adapt to climate change. And we have to do that by 3-fold or 5-fold in order to meet the requirements as stipulated in the emissions gap report. And in biodiversity, we obviously have to come to terms in order to come up with something that continues on following on the IG targets. So that's this example we are speaking about here today is really bringing these 2 things together, because the question is, do new NDCs, are they a blessing or a curse? Because what we see here is probably a phenomenon of eutrophication. It's probably a phenomenon of land-based runoff, and it's a phenomenon that comes with human mitigation efforts towards tackling climate change, because transformation of landscapes into biofuel areas has actually increased, for instance, in Latin America areas into sugarcane areas with very, very little efficiency on fertilizer use. And that has led to additional, I would say, atmospheric deposition as much as riverine runoff. Then in the soils, we do have phosphate as a brain, and we do not quite understand the dynamics. So the biodiversity is an imbalance. That's what we see. We observe it in the Caribbean. We observe it in the African shores, Western African shores. So there's a connectivity. And what it means is we have kind of a global problem seeking local and regional solutions. And if you ask me now about what's the science behind that, well, that's a good question. What science do we actually need? We observe the oceans. We observe the coasts. We have the Global Ocean Observing System, hosted by the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission, IOC, and UNESCO. The essential ocean variables. We have the essential climate variables, but is that really all? Is that really the full package of the story? I think it's physical, it's chemical observations, it's Earth observations by satellites on the one hand, it's buoys and what have you, but it's not really tackling the issue of the biodiversity dynamics. It's not tackling the issue of the interconnectivity, and it's not tackling the proper link to the coast. That's what we've been concerned with for decades, and it's still an unsolved problem. And when it comes to SDGs, I mean, it's an interlinkage between 6 and 14. You could add health, you could add food, you could add sustainable consumption and production, as many as those. So getting the science right is probably already the challenge. And then it comes to the solution space. And I think that's particularly tricky, because usually scientists talk to scientists, and we in UNEP have been producing assessments in the past. Assessments for what? If we're stipulating the issue of what do we see in the environment in terms of state. And that's actually in isolation. It comes from old conservationist kind of times, but now we really need to see the interlinkages. And I think here we have the perfect example. And what that means is, at the end, when it comes to solutions on the regional or local scale, through the conventions or through the people in the communities on the shore, the fisheries communities included, they need to talk to each other. And they need to talk to the governance, to the politicians, to the private sector. The cultural dimension comes in. And what it means in terms of natural capital that they actually risk to lose or may gain if we look into what are the opportunities. So all these issues we are trying to tackle in establishing something which is the Global Environment Monitoring System for Oceans. And it's much harder not to reinvent the wheel and come up with something that's really meaningful than to duplicate. And I think here we have a perfect example. So I would hope that within this webinar I can learn, and I'm happy to contribute and looking forward to the discussions. Let me finish here. Thank you very much indeed for giving me that opportunity.
Thank you very much, Hartwig, for those opening remarks on behalf of UNEP. It is now my pleasure to give the screen to our colleagues from IOC-UNESCO, Cesar Toro, who is based out in Cartagena, Colombia. Cesar, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Mahesh, and welcome to everybody. And I welcome also all my colleagues on the panel and those who are writing their questions in the directly in the chat. So I will encourage all of attendees to use that. There is so many questions, but I would like to also welcome also. I was reminded by my colleague just a few seconds ago, Harvey, on how we have been working already some decades in this issue. And that is what is interesting. I will like to stress here. It's extremely important. We are now looking today in the second webinar that is a joint effort for several UN organizations, including UN Environment, IOC of UNESCO, with their subcommissions, IOC Africa, as well as IOC Caribbean. But what is the point here is that we have now an unprecedented situation that has been highlighting and stressing the realities we are living on. Is everybody thinking about, we are confined, we are thinking about how we are going to address the economic impact, the global economic impact that has been produced by COVID-19. However, climate continues to change. the ocean is continue to stress and to feel the stress of the climate change. So we should be keeping the focus. This pandemic is only highlighting and stressing the realities we are living on, and for some time we have the stress that is the ocean is living. It has had some kind of breath at a moment of thinking. So I would like to stress, as Hervé just said, there is a series of a number of questions that still to be addressed and to be understood concerning sargassum blooming. This is only one change. Is really directly related to climate change. How this is affected is the climate and atmospheric changes in circulation that is really affecting, and the reason why we have those blooming is in the entire tropical Atlantic. In between, from Africa to the Caribbean, is there any connectivity? Is there any how is connected the rivers to run off, like Congo River and the Amazon River, Magdalena River, and other Orinoco? Do they have any impact, real impact, or this is just an assumption? So this is a good number of questions, hypotheses, and theories that need to be tested and addressed. At the same time, we have especially in the wider Caribbean region, in the Western tropical Atlantic, this is one of the global world tourist destination, #1 in the region and the planet. This is one of the places that, because of COVID-19, we understand the reality of what is the largest impact of the tourism. So this is a good opportunity now to address the impact on those ecosystems that the larger number of people that are coming to these islands are producing a large impact. From one hand, we have a very important economic aspect. More than 38% of the GDPs of most of the Caribbean islands states, the GDP income is from the tourism, and that tourism is from the beach, sun, sand, and sea. So these three elements are dedicated to, and that is one of the reasons why the sargassum has been so in understanding the sargassum sand beaching and landing is quite important for those economies, because when you have 100,000 millions of people coming to your country just to enjoy the beach, and suddenly all the beach is covered by sargassum. So what people and the people who are working in tourism, they are looking for is to take away that sargassum as soon as possible, because they are hampering their economic activities. So you see, these are the realities. But in order to address that, we have, fortunately, one of the positive aspects is that we have a large critical mass of experts working on the issue. And we will have today 3 examples of what science is doing and how we are moving forward to testing and answering those questions, hypotheses, and theories. So we have a good number of people working, large, small groups, freelance group, etc. Of course, we will need to have some kind of coordination in order to address these issues. And this is why the work that GESAM, IOC of UNESCO, UN Environment, we are doing collectively, and other groups, regional groups as well. So it's important. We cannot address this issue in isolation. We need to coordinate our efforts. And we were also reminded by Harry on the importance of the global ocean observing system. Here, this is the sine qua non condition. First of all, we need to observe, monitor, in order to understand the dynamics of these processes. However, this is only the first step. We need to go deeper in science in order to address those issues. Why? this is and how the connection is. So member states are asking for an answer, short or mid-term answer. If I am in my country, how much of sargassum is going to land in my beaches, and could you tell me in advance if they are coming or not, and how often, what will be the volume? This is what they are looking for initially, the member states. But in order to answer that very simple question, we need to strengthen our observing system as well as science in order to understand the processes. So I would like to congratulate all of you and encourage all of you to continue the series of webinars that we are doing, and also to join us and communicate with us and share your work with all of us. So this is a very good way of sending information you have individually, so we can move forward with this question. So I wish all of you a very good webinar. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Cesar, on behalf of IOC-UNESCO, the opening remarks. So we move on now to the 3 scientific presentations, and I see that we're close to 320 participants online, so that's great. And for this, I would like to pass the screen on to my colleague, Joanna Grofi from the UNEP Science Division, to facilitate the next 3 presentations. Joanna, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mahesh. Good afternoon, everyone. And let me just also add my voice in welcoming all of you. And thank you very much to our panelists and everyone who has been part of organizing the second webinar. As you have already heard, we are going to have 3 presentations. And the first one is going to be on the biology and impact of pelagic sargassum species. As you are aware, we need science and we need to really understand. And science will help us in a sense to understand this weed. Science will help us in the observations and the collection of data. Science will help us in our assessment of what impact this weed is having on the environment. And science will also help us to link whatever we are studying to policy, so that it will help us assess the livelihoods and the impact that one can make out of the environment. And so we're going to have these 3 presentations, which will actually help us to get a better understanding. The first one, we will have Brigitta van Tussenbroek. And Brigitta is a principal research scientist at the Seagrass Research Laboratory in Mexico. And she has over 30 years experience, and she's been studying these processes and functions of seagrass meadows over the years. She's also published a lot of work on seagrass ecology and population and genetics and so on. And so without further ado, let me just leave the floor with Brigitta so that she can tell us more about the biology and the science of sargassum. Brigitta, you have the floor.
Hello, thank you, Joanna. Do you all see my screen now? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so today I'm briefly giving a brief introduction into the science of sargasso. And sargasso, to us, is the holopelagic sargassum species. So because there are sargassum, which are really a lot of benthic species also. So we really concentrate sargasso, at least for us, and in this talk will be all the holopelagic sargassum species. And what do we know about them? Well, to start with the biology. In the original Sargasso Sea, which is more or less in the Bermuda Triangle, there were always mainly two forms or two species, and each with one form, which is Sargassum natans 1 and Sargassum fluitans 3, which you see on your right. But when we got this new phenomenon, which is now named the Great Atlantic Sargasso Belt, which is in the southern Atlantic Ocean, a third form of, well, a second form of natans, but became obvious, which is Sargassum natans 8. Each one of these have their own characteristics, which are, if you really train yourself a little bit, you can easily recognize these species. They have a different general aspect, one a bit broader lamina, other with more narrow lamina, and the bladders and whether they have spines on their stems, that really clearly distinguishes them. And people have also found that they are genetically different. So they're really well-established species and morphological forms. But this composition of these forms, what we have seen, changes through time. So at my lab, my collaborators, they've been collecting, sometimes at weekly, sometimes they missed sometimes intervals. They've been collecting the Sargassum across a transect to different sites and weighing what type of morph they were finding there. And what we can see here is that Sargassum fluitans 3 is the major species usually. But in the beginning, 2016, Sargassum natans 8 dominated, which was slowly replaced through time by Sargassum natans 1. In 2020, Sargassum natans 8 became a little bit more obvious again, but now it's more or less back again, I think, to dominance, mainly Sargassum fluitans and Sargassum natans 1. Well, what does this say us? Well, in the original Sargasso Sea, Sargassum natans 1 dominates, which is the major species. These are results from Shelladal of an expedition in 2014-15. Sargassum fluitans less present, and they already found some remnants of Sargassum natans 8 in the Sargasso Sea, which was not really found there before. And in the Great Atlantic Sargasso Belt, in that time, Sargassum natans 8 dominated with a little bit Sargassum fluitans. We also found this in 2015, which I don't show in our graphs, in Mexico. So, but on the other hand, we know that the Great Atlantic Sargasso Belt, when it enters into the Caribbean, eventually that Sargassum ends up in the Sargasso Sea. And there, a recent study by Johnson et al., they said that they postulated that due to climate change, an anomaly in the North Atlantic oscillation, there became more windage, and this windage really pushed Sargassum from the Sargasso Sea into the southern Atlantic Ocean in 2010. But then, if that had happened, and if that's the connectivity, we would have expected the specific composition of the Sargasso Sea being similar to the Great Atlantic Sargasso Belt, which is not the case. It was different. So until now, we know that the variations exist throughout, at least also throughout the Caribbean, but we really don't know yet what these variations tell us about origin. Maybe there are multiple origins, and we don't really know yet what it tells us about movement. But that's all we know at this moment. But I think it's very useful to keep on observing these fluctuations. But what we do know is that these morphs or forms behave differently biologically. These are preliminary studies of the growth in the winter 2016 of Sargassum fluitans and Sargassum natans 1. If you can remember, as 8, I'm sorry, natans 1, we didn't have it at the time. And we can see that Sargassum natans 8 grew a lot faster in the conditions just outside our lab in the Caribbean, in the Reef Lagoon, than Sargassum fluitans. Sargassum natans 8 doubled its biomass between 12 and 14 days, which is very fast. And the rate of Sargassum fluitans more or less is a little bit higher than those in the Sargasso Sea, which we can see on the right, because those are the data by Lapointe of 1986 of the Sargasso Sea. So it tells us we really need to know a lot more. What we also found is we added nutrients to the small cages, which we had on buoys in the sea, And we found when he added a lot of nutrients, the Sargassum really didn't like it. It grew less. These are means to try to know the specific differences, reaction, how they react to temperature, how they react to nutrients, to understand more about this basic biology of these species and morphological forms. What we also know is that these species and morphological forms have different constituents. For example, what you see here above is the metal content. I took some selected one, arsenic, manganese, and rubidium. And you can see here that they vary among the morphs and the species. And these are not constant. It's not that always Sargassum natans 8 has a higher content. Sometimes it's lower depending on the mineral. And these were collected simultaneously at the same site. So this is not an effect of collection. And of course, arsenic, total arsenic is of special concern because of potential health hazards and hazards to an environment. Milledgeville, in a recent study in 2020, also found that the methane production of these Sargassum morphs and forms is different, with Sargassum natans 8 producing more methane than the other ones. But still, the methane production of Sargasso as a whole is low. They think it may be because of high fiber content and maybe phenolic content. So now I go to the impact of Sargasso. What do we know about the impact of Sargasso on the environment? So again, I'm contrasting the golden tide, which is Sargassum floating in the open ocean, beneficial in many ways because it's a refuge to a lot of fauna. And then on the other hand, there's the Sargasso, which accumulates to the shore and gets lixiviates in the nearshore water, which creates a Sargassum brown tide. First, the impact of the golden tide. We really don't know what these enormous masses of new masses of Sargasso actually do to the open ocean. There are some indications. For example, fisheries. And Hazel Oxford at Hermes, Barbados, has registered that the dolphin fisheries and the flying fish fishery decrease when there's Sargassum. But for example, in Mexico, I've talked to the some fishermen, and they actually say that the dolphin fish fishery increased. So it may be even region dependent. We really don't know. The other thing, as I said, the golden tide is a habitat for a lot of species. A lot of them are new to the regions where the Sargassum arrives. We don't know whether these species stay in the systems and if they really, and what the consequences will be. Are they potential invaders? Yes or no? We need to know. We don't know. Another consequence may be on the surface feeders, such as whale sharks, which whale shark watching is a really large tourist activity also recently. And they found that when there's a lot of Sargassum at the ocean, the tourist operators I've been talking to, the whale sharks don't surface. They stay lower down to feed there, which is understandable. They don't like to swallow the Sargassum. Another consequence is, of course, that the Sargassum in the open ocean sucks up a lot of carbon, also nutrients, and they have been calculated that the carbon, the blue carbon fixed by Sargassum and stored in Sargassum, is equivalent to the carbon stored in other marine systems such as seagrasses and mangroves, which might be favorable, of course, but also this Sargassum dies and it drops down its organic material into the deep ocean. And what the consequences are for the deep ocean, or whether it derives or anything, and what does it mean? Where does it go? We really don't know yet. And then we have the Sargassum brown tide and its impact. In previous studies or talks, I've already highlighted, and many before me also, the multiple impacts of the Sargassum brown tide. Fauna is dying, it interferes with turtle nesting, it changes trophic relationships, seagrass meadows are lost, beaches eroded, water quality degraded, microbiome changes, possibly it induces increased coral disease, and I think many more impacts will be found, unfortunately, when we continue to study this phenomenon, it continues. But we really don't know yet how large the area of influence of the Sargassum brown tide is and how long the impact lasts. For example, most people and usually also managers only see the direct impacts of the accumulated algal masses on the beaches, on the shore, which last as long as the Sargassum brown tides themselves, which is the visual aspect. It's the really bad smell, which may be a health hazard if people are chronically exposed to it. It also affects jewelry and electronic equipment of people living near the beach. It interferes with turtle nesting and hatching. Again, the dead fish in the algal masses. That's something really obvious, and also the brown water. That's what the people think of Sargassum. And this is how far they see the impact of the Sargassum brown tide. So the commonly perceived area of influence is what you see here, just the near the beach and the brown waters. But the area of influence, as you can see, is a lot larger. You already saw golden tides may have an impact. Brown tides have multiple impacts on the coastal ecosystem, on the reef lagoon and on the reef and on the seagrasses and the mangroves, and the dunes. But also, if Sargassum is retrieved from the beach or the ocean and is not deposited in a correct way, if, for example, in karstic environments, which happens in Mexico, and it's just dumped in mangroves or anywhere else on land without proper treatment, these lixiviates will end up in the groundwater, possible consequences, and will end up in the sea again. So the area of influence actually goes from the inland to the open ocean, and it's just not the small beach section where the Sargassum is accumulated. And we need to work on trying to broaden this perception of the area of influence of Sargassum, so people start contemplating it in mitigation measurements. The other thing is the commonly perceived time of influence is as long as the Sargassum brown tide lasts, so as long as these masses are visible. So the Sargassum is gone, everything is back to normal again. But most people don't see that the system is not the same after the Sargassum has arrived. And there's a lot of organic material deposited, a lot of nutrients. So we really don't know how long these how these conditions persist. And the other question, of course, is, does it matter? Well, that depends, at least in my opinion. And if the Sargassum brown tide negatively impacts the ecosystem services, such as coastal protection, which you can see here, we can just take that. So, for example, we don't do anything about Sargassum and we start to adapt to Sargassum just continuously arriving there. I think it's a decision which needs to be made, or we need to mitigate Sargassum, or either we can do nothing, which is of course, or we minimize the problem, which is of course the least desirable decision, and then just have everything disaster going its way. But if we want to mitigate or even adapt, we need to know the spatial extent of the promote of Sargassum brown tide, and we need to know the times of impact and the time for recovery. So this is, I'm going to give some examples of that in the next slides. For example, water quality. One of the major services, of course, of the Caribbean are turquoise blue oceans, which are affected by the Sargassum brown tides because they organic particles and lixiviates and phenolic compounds and nutrients are deposited in the water at massive amounts. For example, near the coast in Puerto Morelos, we found that the organic material increased from 1 to 14% after Sargassum brown tide. 1 year after the Sargassum brown tide in Puerto Morelos, which was the first one in 2015, in 2016, we still measured increased phosphorus in the seagrass leaves, indicating eutrophication, and we still measured that the similar conditions, that the light attenuation coefficient was a lot higher, meaning that the water were not really as clear as before. So how long does it take to recover? Well, that really depends on the time that nutrients and this organic matter is flushed out of the system again. So we need modeling. We need to understand the dynamics of that. And of course, this is highly system dependent. More hydrodynamic systems may be able to flush this out a lot faster than others. but most likely this will last decades. Maybe hurricanes or storms may help this flushing, but of course, hurricanes and storms are not really very desirable now because our sea ecosystems are already compromised and we really don't know how they will react to these major events. Another service, again, for tourism is the beach. And we found that both the Sargassum, so the Sargassum itself may cause some erosion, but also at one site, and which is one of our study sites in Cancun, the beach was eroded when the seagrasses were lost, which you can see 10 to 15 meters. So how long does it take to recover this service? Well, one way is that the community, which used to be near shore, which used to be dominated by Sargassum, by Thalassia, which you see up here, which is a seagrass which fixes sediments, attenuates waters, makes the water more clearer, and therefore aids in stability, was replaced by another plant underwater ground, an algae, Halimeda incrustata. Now, Halimeda incrustata may not have those same services as Thalassia, deeply rooted and very stable, etc., but it produces a lot of sand. Usually on their normal reef lagoons, it produces a couple of tracks of sand every hectare. So it's a lot of sand. So we try to see, well, does the sand production of Halimeda maybe compensate for the loss of sand of the beach? So what you can see here, Halimeda, it produces, what you see here is all the new growth, and what you see here is what's lost, and it gives the sediments, and it produces a lot of calcareous sand. So we calculated the total volume of lost sand because we had the beach profiles and how they changed. We know how much Halimeda was there. We know how much Halimeda more or less grows. And with the density of the sediment, you can calculate how much is in volume. And then we found that for the lost volume, over 3,800 cubic meters, and Halimeda, which only produces 12 cubic meters per year in this area, we need more than 320 years of growth of Halimeda to replenish the sand which was lost at the beach. If, of course, all sand remains there, not transported, etc., etc. So that's a very long time. So maybe the meadow recovers before that. Well, this is a very basic growth model of Thalassia clonal growth and expansion based on clonal growth rules and logistic equation at different sites in Puerto Morelos. And we can see that it usually takes between 12 and 50 years to come back, depending on the site and how fast it grows, etc., etc. So so recovery of the beach maintenance service of the seagrasses takes at least a decade, probably more. So based on this information, we now know we can't just rely on natural recovery to recover the service of the beach. We need to do something about it. So maybe find an ecosystem-based engineering solution, which is a combined engineering with restoring seagrass, etc., etc. But it's good to know. So to maintain the ecosystem services after only one Sargassum brown tide, it has really two major challenges. One is mitigate the Sargassum brown tides, which is a major challenge. It needs a regional approach, a lot of collaboration, and we all need to work together to do this. But to restore the ecosystem services, we need also to restore the impacted ecosystems at really an incredibly large scale. The Mexican coast is only 900 kilometers, a coastline. So restoring reefs and seagrass meadows and mangroves and dunes along a 900-kilometer stretch of coast is also an enormous challenge. And I think we can really learn from each other throughout the whole region affected by the Sargassum brown tides, including Africa and the whole Caribbean, and learn from each other how we can do this. And this is my presentation. Thank you very much. And there will be this Q&A section to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Brigitte, for taking us through the biology, the impact that the Sargassum will have, how we can intervene, how it's impacting on the tourism and other livelihoods, and how eventually we can re-engineer the ecosystems, and so on and so forth. This is very useful information, and definitely it will help, policymakers in making their decisions. But let's move on to the next speaker and find out how much more science we can use in managing the Sargassum seaweed. So we have next the monitoring of Sargassum from space. And Manchou Wang is going to lead us in this presentation of how we can monitor Sargassum from space. We have just learned that the Sargassum that is the golden tide, which is in the deep oceans, and there is also the Sargassum, the brown floating, which comes closer to the beach. So Manchou, who is a postdoctoral researcher from the Optical Oceanographic Lab at the University of South Florida, is going to lead us in this presentation. I just want to remind participants that we will have a question and answer session after the 3 presentations, and as have already been announced, you can kindly post any questions that you have so that after all the presentations, we can look at these questions and get some good answers from the presenters together. So Manchou, without wasting any more time, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Joanna. So, hello, can everybody see my screen right now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So hello everyone. My name is Mengqiu Wang. I work with Dr. Chuanmin Zhu at the University of South Florida College of Marine Science. During the past 5 years, I've been doing researches to study how to use different types of satellite imagery to monitor the Sargassum distribution, the biomass, the transport, the movement, and the bloom mechanisms, all sorts of information by utilizing satellite data. So, as introduced in the earlier talks by Brigitta and the earlier introductions, Sargassum is a type of brown macroalgae that spends its entire life cycle floating on the ocean surface. And under different environmental conditions, it may form features of variable spatial scale, ranging from little clumps to small, that are a few centimeter scale, to large Sargassum windrows that are hundreds of kilometers long from space. So due to the existence of these large-scale features and their relatively persistent nature, it is possible to use the satellite data to absorb or see them from the satellite sensors with relatively coarse resolution. Let's say even with 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer scale pixels. Since the year 2011, there have been increasing amount of Sargassum beaching occurring over the Caribbean Sea, Gulf of Mexico, West Africa, and even Florida, negatively impacting the local ecosystem, the economy, the environment. Therefore, this is calling for further studies to better understand this phenomenon. Compared to the traditional shipboard investigation, the advantages of the satellite data is first of all, it has very high spatial and temporal coverages, relatively speaking. It may sample the vast ocean area even once a day. And it's often equipped with sensors that can obtain important spectral information that will reflect things like the Sargassum biomass, how are they healthy or not, or the physiological states, etc. All sorts of other information from that. Therefore, I would like to use the power of satellite data to study research questions like where are the Sargassum distributed, and how do they move, grow, or die, and what are potential impacts of the different environmental conditions, and how much Sargassum is out there. And importantly, is it possible for us to making Sargassum bloom predictions for future bloom or beaching events, especially for those regions that are strongly impacted by the Sargassum beaching events. So in this talk, I would introduce from these two major perspectives. First, on the detection and quantification algorithms that applies to different satellite imagery, and then on how to use different types of satellite imageries to observations to make sargassum bloom predictions for taking Gulf of Mexico as an example. Oh, no, sorry, taking Caribbean Sea as an example. So from the bare eye, we can easily tell that sargassum has brownish to yellowish color that are quite distinctive from the background seawater, which is crystal blue. However, when searching for the sargassum signal over a vast ocean from a satellite that are oftentimes 700 kilometers above the seawater, it has become tricky because the signal is so weak in the visual wavelengths. There's really nothing show up on these RGB images, and there's just the blue water, nothing popped up. However, luckily, as shown in this field-based spectrum, over the near-infrared wavelengths, the sargassum has enhanced signal in this wavelength, which is much stronger compared to the blue line, which indicates the seawater reflectance. Therefore, we can utilize these reflectance properties as well as other morphological characteristics, such as sargassum elongate features, to design algorithms to locate the presence of sargassum pixels from across satellite sensor imagery. Here, the three gray bars represent the locations where MODIS have measurements. And by utilizing these enhanced reflectance properties, we are able to see some sargassum features actually appeared under this broad water. And this is the index images generated which reflect this enhanced signal. The red arrow here denotes the location of these brighter sargassum snake features. Please note that throughout this talk, I will use the black color to represent the presence of clouds or land or other kind of non-optimal observing conditions. So this black color actually represents under night cloud pixels. So you can visualize this is very apparent with its index images. All these sargassum features popped out, and we can utilize that to identify the sargassum from the satellite images. So for each of these pixels on these index images or fade images, part of the atmospheric signal has to be first removed, and an advanced subtracting algorithm was applied to estimate the amount of enhanced light in these near-infrared bands. So because satellite data have high spatial and temporal coverages, for example, the MODIS sensors measure the entire Atlantic Ocean on a daily basis, there are large lump of images to be analyzed. So in order to effectively utilize this huge amount of data, it is almost impossible to rely on manual efforts from human experts, and automatic processing is required for effective analysis. And although the sargassum flakes may appear to be apparent, they have normally brighter color compared to the nearby seawater on these FAI images. It is not really an easy task to automatically detect them from a large satellite imagery. First of all, note that there was a crossing image gradient that can typically be caused by the sun glint or the imperfect atmospheric correction, etc. And also in many situations, the cloud shadows can also pop up and showing us similar brighter features, brighter and elongate features. So therefore, a set of techniques were first designed to consider the background seawater variations as well as to reduce the false alarm detections caused by the cloud shadows and all other confusing oceanic features. So after applying these techniques, the overall prediction accuracy is about 85% for the general cases. And this guarantees applicability of this automatic processing approach to analyze the huge amount of satellite data. And these images below show the situation in one of the non-bloom year, 2013, and one of the major bloom year, 2015. And the results have shown that this algorithm is capable of reflecting the bloom and non-bloom situations with very low noise contamination. And this guarantees the applicability of this general approach. So because we have this automatic detection algorithm, we can now analyze in huge amount of data to calculate weekly mean sargassum distributions or even monthly mean sargassum distributions for large areas like the Central West Atlantic, the Caribbean Sea, the Gulf of Mexico, and West Africa as well. And these mean distribution maps were generated first by dividing the entire area of interest into small grid cells and then averaging all the valid observations obtained during that time period. For example, during August 2015. And this map shows the general process of generating the mean mosaic sargassum distributions in August 2015. And the final outcome shows strong sargassum blooms occurring across Central West Atlantic. And these data products are made available on our Sargassum Watch System source at the University of South Florida from our Optical Oceanography Lab website. And this is the link address to our Sargassum Watch System, which you will find a lot of useful information for sargassum monitoring generating from the satellite data. And this is a clickable map, which you may click on the regions you are interested in. For example, the Eastern Gulf of Mexico. By clicking in that region, it will lead you to the web page with the newest sargassum weekly mean composite map, along with other satellite products like the chlorophyll, the sea surface temperature information, and on these sargassum density maps, the brighter color represents higher sargassum density. The whitish color represents higher sargassum density. And on this region, this is actually the newest results I obtained yesterday, showing the recent situation that sargassum was brought into the Gulf of Mexico by the dominant ocean currents, and some of the sargassum already brought into the Florida Straits, and they potentially need some potential beaching events in those affected regions. So to better evaluate the potential ecological and economic impacts of sargassum, it is even more important to evaluate the sargassum biomass besides the distribution. So to do so, the key step is to establish a relationship between sargassum reflectants and their corresponding sargassum biomass density, or sargassum weights. During the past few years, I have been out to the sea several times to connect sargassum samples and to design experiments to simulate how the light field changes at different biomass densities. And this is a few images showing myself working in the field and sampling sargassum in Gulf of Mexico and Florida Straits during 2017 to 2019. I wasn't able to attend the cruise for this year because of the COVID-19 events. And during these experiments, I used a water bucket placed under the detector, under the field of view of a detector, and simulated the sargassum densities from low density to high densities by putting in specific amounts of sargassum samples. Clearly, with the increase in sargassum density, the sargassum reflectance increasing amount of light with this increasing density. And these results can be used to establish a model, a biomass model, which can directly link the satellite measured reflectance data to the sargassum weights or sargassum biomass density. So using this biomass model, I have estimated the overall sargassum biomass for the Caribbean Sea and Gulf of Mexico, Caribbean Sea and Central West Atlantic, and discovered there was a huge amount of sargassum biomass in the previous bloom years. And this makes us wonder, will this sargassum carbon contribute to play a significant role in the surface carbon cycle for this tropical Atlantic region? And this is something not previously known by the science community due to the lack of data. So to test this hypothesis, I have measured the mean carbon content in the Sargassum samples and estimated Sargassum content from the satellite-derived biomass data. So if we assume the mean chlorophyll concentration is 0.1 micrograms per cubic meter, and the mean carbon to chlorophyll ratio is about 74, which is the model's value, mean situation for the Central Atlantic, then in one of the bloom year, let's say July 2015, the Sargassum can account for greater than 18% of the phytoplankton carbon over the study region shown in this map. So, as introduced by Brigitta, during the big peak Sargassum months, Sargassum can sink into the ocean bottom at very fast speed and will, if I recall correctly, there's some literature documenting they can reach to the ocean bottom within a few days. And this could potentially affect the basalt community. And there have been researches showing that after the major 2015 to 2016 bloom events, then on the ocean bottoms, there are photographs taken showing the Sargassum laying on the ocean bottom. So based on all this Sargassum detection and quantification algorithms, we have processed nearly 20 years of satellite records and discovered and named a recurrent Sargassum, Great Atlantic Sargassum belt that connects the Central Atlantic Ocean, reaching from the West Africa, the Caribbean Sea, and the Gulf of Mexico. In one of the major bloom years, June 2018, this Great Atlantic Sargassum belt is about 8,000 kilometers long, carried with greater than 20 million metric tons of Sargassum biomass inside those regions. And based on our estimations from the satellite record, this Great Atlantic belt has been identified by the Guinness World Record as the greatest macroalgal blooms in the world. The Great Atlantic belt appears in almost every year in the Atlantic Ocean during the July months, the summer months, since the year 2011. But the coverages and the magnitude varied in each year. For example, in 2013, there is almost no Sargassum blooms occurred in the Central Atlantic area. But in another year, the year 2018, the bloom intensity is much higher than all other years. Look at if you can see the reddish color is so much stronger than no other major bloom years. And we have seen a lot of news reports showing that the Sargassum biomass is so much stronger, and a lot of beaching events occurred during that year. So having seen the increasing amount of Sargassum blooms from the satellite record, it becomes crucial for us to learn to predict for the events, and so that we may make better plans for the research and mitigation actions, as many of the other earlier speakers have already mentioned. So we want to use the historical Sargassum distribution and the physical connectivities to design a prediction strategy. So based on our previous satellite record, as well as physical modeling, we have found that most of the Sargassum reaching the Caribbean Sea region are actually coming from the Central West Atlantic. And this is the animation showing the Sargassum situation in the year 2014 to 2015. So clearly, the Sargassum first initiated in the Central West Atlantic region hotspot, and then carried by the ocean currents and prevailing winds into the Caribbean Sea region for the later spring to summer blooms. So based on this idea, we may use the information from the early bloom condition in the Central West Atlantic hotspot to predict the spring to summer blooms in the Caribbean Sea with at least 2 months of lead time. So applying that prediction strategy, this map shows the prediction accuracy from May to August in the Caribbean Sea area. So for most of the region, the prediction accuracy reached greater than 80%. And this is indicated by this can be indicated by the reddish color that most of the region is very red. So higher accuracy was also found in the Eastern Caribbean with the over the windward Los Antilles Islands, especially during the later summer months. And this is very easy to understand because those regions are closer to the Central West Atlantic, and those were more likely to be affected by the Sargassum seaweeds coming from this site. And this result gave us confidence that our prediction system can provide reliable bloom predictions for the Caribbean Sea area, and the method may be easily adapted to other regions facing the similar problem. So using this prediction strategy, we have studied to generating Sargassum prediction bulletins and since January 2018, and we have been distributing these Sargassum prediction bulletins to the local residents and management agencies and received very positive feedback on the results. And if you're interested in our results, you may email me and I can put you in our email list. So by the end of each month, we will be able to send you the updates based on our most current satellite observation. So this will give you some general information on how the bloom may develop in the coming months. And all this information are available on our Sargassum Watch System website. And if you Google that information, you will be able to find all this, the previous bulletins as well as the latest information. And for the future research, we are also trying to design algorithms to targeting on specific beaches or islands so that we can have more timely and useful information for local residents that are impacted by the regions. Because the current results are relative at a relatively broader scale, and our future efforts are more targeted and small and finer resolution, close to shore beaching monitoring. And with that, I would like to thank my co-authors, thank my colleagues, and also thank my advisor, Dr. Chuan-Min Hu, and with all the funding agencies as well. And I also want to thank NASA and NOAA for providing the satellite data for this analysis. And I will take future questions in the QA section. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Meng Chao, for that very interesting presentation using space to monitor sargassum. The advantages it has, how you finally got to be able to predict and detect. All very interesting how the science is getting deep and is becoming more useful because now from this sargassum biomass density, you are now able to work how it affects, the carbon cycle, and eventually how you are coming out with these sargassum prediction bulletins, which turn out to be early warning for people who live in those areas where sargassum is occurring, and it will also help to plan what to actually do with this sargassum seaweed when it appears. Thank you very much. So we are going deep into the science, and next we have Anne. Anne is going to actually tell us about how we're going to turn a hazard into an opportunity, the commercialization of sargassum in the Caribbean. We are not looking at this ignoring the West African side, but it seems as if there's a little bit more focus in this region because there's a project there. Thankfully, our next seminar, when it happens, will be focusing on West Africa. And so there will be an opportunity for the work that is being done in that region also to be showcased. Now, Anne is a professional agronomist with about over 12 years experience, and she's been working as a consultant on a wide range of projects throughout the Caribbean and the Central American region. And she's currently working on a guide, on Sargassum uses guide, working on this project, which is sponsored by the FAO and the GEF. And so Anne is going to share some of her experience on the use of sargassum in the Caribbean region. And the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you very much for this opportunity. Can you see my screen, the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, great. So thank you for this opportunity. My talk is about turning a hazard into an opportunity and commercialization of sargassum in the Caribbean. I would just like to highlight collaborators, so Dr. Brigitte van Tussenberg, Dr. Shelly-Ann Cox, Dr. Hazel Oxenford, and Dr. Iris Monroe. Okay, so the outline of my talk is we're going to do an outline of the Sargassum uses guide that we have been developing, an overview of sargassum composition, current and potential uses of sargassum, examples of commercialization in the Caribbean, an overview of the main challenges to commercialize sargassum-based products. And then we'll look quickly at a biomass scalability index and some concluding remarks. So let's start. We have been developing a sargassum uses guide. This is a collaborative effort between the University of the West Indies, the Center for Resource Management and Environmental Studies, CERMES, in Barbados, in collaboration with the Food and Agricultural Organization, which is part of the project Climate Change Adaptation in the Eastern Caribbean Fisheries Sector, or shorter CC4FISH. Okay, so this guide is intended for researchers, entrepreneurs, and policymakers. So what are the potential uses for sargassum? We have started with a review on seaweed uses in general. We have focused on the brown seaweed, and then we have looked at different applications for sargassum species. Of course, there's over 350 species of sargassum. And then we focused in more on the holopelagic sargassum. The guide will be available very soon. So this basically is a starting point. We are looking currently what is being done in the Caribbean is a starting point to see who is doing what and where. We're developing a directory of ongoing research and commercialization. And we included in the guide some highlighted case studies of certain businesses and research projects that are currently ongoing. Then we include a biomass scalability index and what are the current challenges linked to the commercialization of sargassum. Again, it's going to be available very soon. So this is a general overview of sargassum composition. Of course, it's a very complex composition, and there are many elements that play different role and can be used in different end products. Of course, each of these elements can further be analyzed into different compounds. So for example, if we look at two of the groups, the polysaccharides, we see that there are different elements in polysaccharides. So you can have laminarin, mannitol, alginates, coidans, and cellulose. If we look at the secondary metabolites, there are other elements, the flavonoids, saponoids, phenolics and terpenoids, sterols, and carotenoids. Now, what can we do with sargassum? How can we use the sargassum? For our uses guide, we have focused on 14 potential uses for sargassum, and we will dive a bit more into the different 14 potential uses. So we're going to start with agriculture. There's the animal husbandry. Sargassum, seaweeds in general, are rich, have a rich nutritional composition made of proteins, minerals, vitamins, fatty acids, carbohydrates, and bioactive compounds. The protein content, however, of pelagic sargassum is usually low, between 3 and 15% of dry weight, compared to other algae, like the green algae that contain higher levels of protein, more around 40 to 60%. However, they have prebiotic activity. So prebiotic means that there are different types of fiber that feed the beneficial bacteria in the feed can digest easier. Also, there have been several studies that have determined that methane emissions are reduced when livestock are fed with a supplement of seaweed. These reductions can go up to 80% of methane. And we would need to carry out more testing with pelagic sargassum and see the effect on livestock. So basically, addition of seaweed to ruminants' feed could potentially play an important greenhouse gas mitigation measure in the Caribbean, potentially in the future. There are several farmers in the northern parts of Mexico that have reported to been using sargassum as a feed supplement for their livestock in dairy farms. One example is the organic inputs. In Jamaica, they have been developing a sargassum-based goat feed, which is made of a mix of approximately 30% sargassum and locally available organic agro-processing waste. However, we have to be aware that seaweed tend to accumulate heavy metals, such as the recent publication from Mexico that is showing 86% of the samples exceed the total arsenic maximum limit for animal fodder, which is established at 40 ppm of dry weight in the EU, and in Canada it's been established at 8 ppm. There are some other studies, some samples from British Virgin Islands, Guadeloupe, Ghana, Turks and Caicos also have determined that the total arsenic level was above 40 ppm. So there is a lot of variability in time and location. Let's look now at crop production. So sargassum biomass can also be used to produce biochar through a pyrolysis process that consists of a thermal decomposition of materials at very elevated temperatures in an oxygen-limited environment. Biochar can be added to soil, especially degraded soil, to improve soil quality, so enhancing soil structure, improving porosity, increasing water and nutrient retention capacity, and many more. One example of this in the Caribbean is the company called Holdex in Martinique. They have been commercializing a sargassum-based biochar. It's mixed with other organic waste. We can use sargassum as a mulch. There have been different projects in the Caribbean, such as the Algae Nova in Dominican Republic, Holdex, Sargassum in Mexico, and research has been ongoing at the University of the West Indies in Barbados. Compost can be made with sargassum. We have seen that sargassum compost is better in co-composting, so mixed with other organic material. Some examples, again, Algae Nova, Holdex, Suez, which is a company in Guadeloupe, and University of the West Indies. We can also use fertilizers, different types of fertilizers, plant tonics, biostimulants. There's a company in St. Lucia, Algas Organics, very popular company, Red Diamond Compost in Barbados, Sargassum in Mexico, and also we can use the digestate from the anaerobic digester as a fertilizer. Another use in agriculture is for crop protection. There has been ongoing studies at UE in Trinidad to show potential weedicide, bactericide, and fungicide properties. And then sargassum can also be used as a growth substrate for mushroom production. There has been some research going on at the CICI in Mexico, so it's the Centro de Investigación Científica del Yucatán, and the Colegio de Postgraduados in Mexico. Again, we have to be aware because we tend to accumulate heavy metals, and there are maximum concentrations and limits depending on the country. For example, in Canada, there's a maximum total arsenic of 75 ppm in fertilizers. Let's look at biofuels. We can produce the Sargassum biomass is a resource that's available cheaply and in large quantity. So there's ongoing research to determine how this biomass can be used as biofuels. For example, the bioethanol. Some research in the Caribbean is at the University of the West Indies and in Mexico at the CC. We can use biomass pellets, or also called biopellets. They can be made from a mix of organic wastes and used for energy storage. These pellets are used for different applications, such as fuel replacement for heaters, cooking, and other applications. There's a company in Mexico called Energreen that is looking to commercialize biopellets made with sargassum and organic waste and for use in local hotels. There is also a pilot project that occurred in Guadeloupe called EcoDec. Another biofuel application is biomethane or biogas. It's produced by anaerobic digestion. It can be used with sargassum as a feedstock. There has been different research trials, and they indicate that sargassum alone is not the best methane production. However, in co-digestion, we have been seeing promising results. Mixed with other organic waste, it gives a better methane yield. Other research trials are underway to determine the efficacy of different pre-treatment methods to improve the digestibility of sargassum in anaerobic digesters. One such example is in Mexico. There has been some interesting preliminary results using a local fungus to increase methane yield by more than 20% using a pre-treatment. And there are also several pilot projects using sargassum to test. These projects were in St. Lucia, Grenada, Barbados, Trinidad, Guadeloupe, Martinique, and several other places. There are also some more international companies in France, Netherlands, Israel, Germany. And I would like to highlight one current project in Punta Cana in Dominican Republic. It's a collaborative project called Energy Algae Project. It's a collaboration between the University of APEC in Santo Domingo, YAMAOF in Israel, Algae Nova, and Grupo Punta Cana. Briefly, they have installed 5 small-scale units, home biogas, and they're testing different proportions of feedstock. So sargassum mixed with other hotel waste and manure, and they're looking at the methane yield. This pilot project is serving as a basis for the implementation of a larger 1 megawatt co-digestion model biogas facility. And their preliminary field and laboratory results are very promising. And the team has seen a better methane production they have found a specific mix of sargassum and organic waste. And their results will be published very soon. When we're looking at bioremediation and purification applications, sargassum biomass can be converted to activated carbon. It has high adsorptive capacity and make them greatly effective for the removal of metal ions, dyes, and chlorinated compounds from drinking water, wastewater, soil, and air. So these are examples of filtration in water and wastewater treatment. Activated carbon, as we know, can be used in air and gas purification. And now with the COVID, everybody is familiar with these face masks with activated carbon. And in bioremediation. Ongoing research and commercialization of sargassum activated carbon with pelagic species include the PyroSAR project in Guadeloupe. These are projects financed by the Interreg project. SARTribe project also in Guadeloupe. They have other projects with the Covachim laboratory at the Université des Antilles, the INTEC in Dominican Republic, Grupo TMM in Mexico, NBC in French Guyana, and Tecmalab in Dominican Republic, and as well as the NST project in Guadeloupe. There's a very large market opportunity in the Caribbean and globally for activated carbon. The global market value is estimated at almost $5 billion US, so there's a lot of opportunity. The example of the NST project, which is based in Guadeloupe, offers a unique and environmentally friendly solution for the valorization of sargassum. It's a mobile unit that uses a solar microwave process, and which is based on the pyrolysis and gasification principles to transform the biomass to electricity and activated carbon. Anti-fouling coatings. So this is a big challenge. The biofouling is a big challenge for marine transport and the aquaculture industry. It increases the total water resistance on boat hulls, resulting in additional fuel usage and increased emissions of air pollutants and greenhouse gases. Biofouling also has a great impact on on aquaculture industry and the infrastructure, so cages, nets, ropes, and floaters. Anti-fouling paints and coatings containing chemical compounds eventually leach into marine environment, and researchers have taken the biomimetics approach for the development of new environmentally friendly alternatives for anti-fouling protective coatings. Interestingly, bioactive compounds and fatty acid extracts from brown seaweed were found to have an anti-fouling property. There's a project in the Caribbean in Guadeloupe called Corsair, again financed by the Interreg. They're looking at the impact of chemical products extracted from sargassum and the characterization of natural molecules with anti-fouling properties. Looking at the lubricants, surfactants, and adhesive, there's increasing pressure worldwide from environmental groups for petroleum-based lubricants to be replaced with bio-based lubricants or biolubricants and biosurfactants and bioadhesive. Particularly for applications that are in close contact with water bodies. There's a large demand for eco-friendly products. So there are a wide range of biolubricants in demand for use in the food sectors, pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, agriculture, textile, and biofuels. There's an increasing demand for natural ingredients also in personal use products, such as creams, shampoos, and different things like that. So one of the main challenges in the adhesive industry is to find adhesives that are capable of gluing surfaces under wet conditions, so under aqueous environment. There has been extensive research focusing on marine organisms such as algae to better understand their submerged adhesive abilities and how they could mimic these biochemical processes into artificial materials. So brown algae adhesion properties were linked with the secretion of polyphenols, and adhesive is used in three main applications such as surgical sealing, surgical adhesion, site-specific drug delivery, production of corrugated boards, so forth in clothing, paper products, and many other applications. In the Caribbean, there's currently one project called SAR-Tribe in Guadeloupe, again financed by the Interreg. So we will get more results on this potential application. In the electrochemical industry, there has been a boost in recent research focusing on developing improved electrochemical energy storage for renewable energy devices. Seaweeds are considered as a great source of biomass for use in nano-textured carbons, since their cell walls contain a network of fibrillar constituents, such as cellulose and alginate. Okay, nano-textured carbons are used for electrode material in supercapacitors and high-capacity lithium-ion batteries, such as these. Production of nanotextured carbons are produced based on direct carbonization and pyrolysis of seaweed. Seaweed can be a precursor for these carbons. Some ongoing research in this sector with pelagic sargassum specifically is the Sartribe project in Guadeloupe, and well, the same laboratory, Covachim laboratory at the Université des Antilles, have a wide range of projects. Environmental restoration. Coastal sand dunes ecosystem represent a small area, but it's highly dynamic and important zone. It's located between the land and the ocean. They not only provide protective buffer to help reduce the impact of storm surges, waves, erosion, but they also considered to be a unique habitat of flora and fauna. A strategy to help maintain dunes and prevent erosion include the establishment of vegetation on these dunes. However, the low nutrient content of sand makes this challenging. There has been some research carried out at the Texas A&M University to look how sargassum plays a role in enhancing dune plant growth. They have been carrying out field tests and greenhouse tests with sargassum at the Galveston Island, and they are incorporating compacted sargassum, which they call seabells, into sand dunes and see their effect on vegetation growth. Now, for the food industry, algae have been consumed by humans for thousands of years worldwide, and the consumption of seaweed differs from country to country in terms of the quantity and specific culinary use. Seaweed consumption, for example, in Southeast Asia is traditional, while in non-Asian, European, and North American markets is more of a food for health kind of sector. Algae can either be consumed directly or processed into secondary food products and additives, such as the alginate and agar. Alginates extracted from brown seaweed are widely used as thickeners, emulsifier, preservatives, gelling agents, and stabilizers. Plant-based activated carbon can also be used in the food industry, and we are seeing more of the nutraceutical properties of seaweed through their bioactive compounds. Some of the ongoing research in this industry with pelagic sargassum for alginate extracts for different uses include the University of the West Indies in the 3 campuses, Barbados, Trinidad, Jamaica, the company Alquimar in Mexico, and Grupo Medco in Mexico as well. There have been some chefs in the Cayman Islands and mixologists in Mexico and one brewing company in Texas that have tested sargassum in different food and drinks. However, again, we have to be aware that the sargassum, different seaweeds tend to accumulate heavy metal, and analysis of metal content should be mandatory for any use that could enter the food chain. Clothing and footwear. Algae used to produce sustainable fibers and dyes for textile and footwear industries. For example, in Israel and Germany, there's a company called AlgaLife that have been created the brand Algae apparel using algae biofiber and eco-friendly dyes in the textile industry. Sodium alginate is also used in the textile printing industry to thicken dye pastes. Another example is the Algex in the US that have been using algae to produce a product called Bloom algae foam, which is used in different footwears, in yoga mats, in backpacks, surfboard traction pads, and other applications. One example of pelagic sargassum is the company Renovare in Mexico. They have created a shoe. They use sargassum in the sole, the base of the shoe, and they have been commercializing these very popular shoes nationally. Cosmetics uses. Alginates are widely used in the cosmetics industry. They have beneficial properties, nutrients, they're rich in nutrients, minerals, antibacterial properties, anti-inflammatory, anti-aging, and high moisture capability. There are some potential for use of sargassum in development of sunscreens because the bioactive compounds in seaweeds can absorb UV radiation and act as a UV filter. So there are projects looking into this. Again, activated carbon is widely used in the cosmetic industry, and we can see from these products that activated carbon is added to a lot of products. Ongoing projects with pelagic sargassum alginate extracts. Again, we saw this earlier. And there's also the Instituto Tecnológico de Estudio Superior de Monterrey in Mexico, Alquimar, and Grupo Mexico. In Barbados, there is a company called Oasis Laboratory. They have been commercializing soaps with sargassum inside the soap. Also, the Sargassum in Mexico are looking into cosmetics products such as hair treatments. Again, we have to be careful because we have to check the composition of the sargassum and the end product before we can have any contact with a human body. Now for paper products, cellulose fiber is a major constituent of paper products and is found in the cell wall of plants and seaweeds. Using algae rather than wood to produce paper pulp has several advantages. Faster growth, algae compared to trees has negligible lignin content, and then you use less water and energy and chemicals. Algae-based paper products up to now have been mostly handmade and artisanal products. There is an algal-based paper made in Chile for fruit protection and preservation during export. And they have seen that using this paper, they reduce fruit loss up to 60% due to oxidation and decomposition when they use the algae-based products paper. Some entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs in the region are exploring the use of sargassum in paper making, Sarganico in Mexico, Sargass Project in St. Bart's, the Marine Box in Martinique, Salgax in Mexico, and then Golden Tide Project in Curacao. We see different types of paper products from drink coasters to business cards, notebooks, bags, paper for painting, and even boxes, some cercueil. I'm not sure in English.
Very interesting, but we are almost running out of time. If you can summarize the next few slides.
Okay, so we have pharmaceutical products, and you will be able to read everything in the guide. They have therapeutic effects used in traditional medicine, many projects ongoing in the Caribbean. We have 2 slides left. Construction, there is a lot of demand for bio-based products in construction. We're making biofoam, bioasphalt, even houses with sarga blocks. Bioplastic is a big concern, plastic pollution worldwide. We're looking for alternatives. The Algopac in France have been commercializing bioplastic made of seaweed, and there are several ongoing projects in the region for bioplastic. Again, we have to be careful if they have any contact with food. So some of the main challenges developing in sargassum uses is unpredictable supply, salt content, pollutants, harvesting and equipment, health-related issues, transport and storage, monitoring, regulation, management plan, and access to research and development. So very quickly, the biomass index is to see how much sargassum is needed to develop different products. In the guide, we develop an index to see, okay, what can you do with 1 ton of sargassum, of fresh sargassum? And this basically gives you a summary of the different uses, some of the different uses, and how much is needed of the different products. So what can you do with 1 ton of fresh sargassum? Concluding remarks, many potential uses for Sargassum. We have been doing a lot of work in the Caribbean everywhere, researching commercialization in initiatives across many countries, need for more testing and better understanding of the composition, variability, and presence of heavy metals. And there's no one use fits all. So we need to consider the local context and impacts, environmental, social, and economics. Thank you very much. And I'd like to acknowledge the different entrepreneurs and researchers across the Caribbean that have participated, and of course, the CC4Fish project. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that was very interesting. And it looks like we could spend the whole night just looking at the uses of Sargassum. She started off mentioning 14 potential uses, and we ended up having an A to Z list of the uses. Without any scientific analysis, I will be tempted to say that the uses are outweighing, the negative impact, but we are looking at science. We are looking at science now, so we have to do a proper scientific analysis to determine that. So thank you very much. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have over 340 or so participants online at the moment. And this presentation is being recorded, and so it will be made available on the web page. We also have the presentations will also be made available on the web page. And we also have the profile of the speakers already provided on the web page. So next, we actually are going to look at the question and answers, question and answer session, sorry. And as already indicated, we invited you to post all your questions, and hopefully you have done that already. And Peter Keshaw, who is a member of the GESEM, Peter is actually the immediate past chair of GESEM, but he has been tasked this time around with the tax team working together with the SCORE, the Harmful Algal Bloom Committee, to organize this open science meeting on Sargassum. So this is all leading to that. Peter, you have the floor. We have maybe roughly about, we were going to spend 30 minutes, but let's see how it goes, looking at the number of questions that we have. So Peter, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Joanna. First of all, thank you very much to the three speakers for an excellent collection of talks. Then thank you very much for those who were obviously listening well and sent in a tremendous number of questions. And clearly we won't be able to get through all of those. So we're going to have to think of a way perhaps of getting some of those questions to the speakers after the event. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each of the speakers in turn in the order they spoke, asking an initial couple of questions. I ask you to keep your answers fairly succinct in response. And then once we've done one round, we'll do a second round and then a third round, and we'll see what time we've got to then. And there may be time for a couple of general questions. So first one, I'm going to go to Brigitte. I'm going to start you off with an easy one, which is what databases exist which document the properties, physical and chemical, of Sargassum species prevalent in these areas? Do databases exist?
Well, that's not so easy question. Yeah, there are, but a lot of the analysis actually have been done by private industries who want to commercialize Sargassum, so they're not freely available. I think there are some publications lately. The one I think by Millage, and the recent one it's from Turkey, so one site but it gives quite an extensive a list of what's in Sargassum. So I think that's the one. And then there are a couple of publications which study metals and other stuff. So I think there's not really a central database. So it's basically you have to go to the publications, published work. Okay, thank you. And your second one, which is it's a bit more sciencey, I think.
The question was, can certain fish species, such as Ostracion, I'm afraid I'm not a biologist, survive Sargassum blooms?
Well, Sargassum, if it's the golden tide, it actually is a refuge for many. Well, the boxfishes are not really surface dwellers, so I don't think they would look for Sargassum there. But yeah, then it's a refuge. It's basically the problem when it's Sargassum, the golden tide turns into a brown tide, and then it creates this anoxia by increased bacterial activity, organic matter, etc. And then the poor fish, which are unfortunate enough not to be able to escape that, most of them can, I think, but there are always a couple of which can't, yeah, they will die. So some boxfish have died in Sargassum brown tides, but usually, mostly what is found, the dead fish which are found in the Sargassum brown tides are pelagic ones, actually. But they're the ones which really couldn't escape anymore, one way or another.
Thank you very much. Right, next I'm going to mangle your name, Meng Chao. I'm very sorry. A couple of technical ones. Is it possible to use synthetic aperture radar to see through cloud? And if it goes through cloud, does it pick up Sargassum underneath?
The short answer is it could be, but we have to realize that sometimes some of the Sargassum signal will not show up on the radar images due to various reasons. And yeah, it depends. The short answer, it depends.
Depends, like a lot of things in life, yes.
Yeah.
The second one was about timing. You showed those lovely images which you picked up. And the question here, and I guess they're referring to a particular place. Why is the Sargassum bloom observed mostly in the June-July period? Could you comment on that and say whether it, in fact, it blooms somewhere else at a different time?
So, like in the Sargasso Sea area, the bloom timing is different than the Central Atlantic regions, and that's because of the convergence rather than the Sargassum growth itself. That's the hypothesis we have right now. And for the timing of these blooms, I think right now what we can see is that there could be some internal clock within the Sargassum organism itself. Maybe Brigida will have some idea about this, the internal growth cycle, because you are the biologist. So that's one of the things that there could be some internal cycle within the Sargassum that it tends to grow better in certain seasons, but it may also be affected from the environmental variables like the nutrients, the temperature, the light intensity. Those kind of variations may modulate the cycle as well.
So I guess that's a very interesting area for this open science meeting to focus on. You know, why does it? What are some of the drivers behind that? Thank you very much, Anne. Another couple of technical ones for you. In terms of the use of Sargassum, how is the salt and sand content controlled for the different uses you described?
Yeah, so a lot of the times the Sargassum is washed out with fresh water, but one of the main issue in water scarce countries, such as many islands in the Caribbean, we have to look at the environmental impact of developing these different uses. If they use a lot of water, if they emit a lot of pollution, so forth. So we really have to look at the different impacts that they can have on the development of the uses.
Okay, so that can be a limiting step depending where you are, perhaps.
For the sand, well, we can collect the Sargassum further out instead of, if you have the floating barriers, you can harvest it at sea. So that would reduce the amount of sand.
Yeah, I think also there is a concern that removing Sargassum with the sand can actually have an impact on the beach itself, because you're removing some of that solid material. Yeah. Okay, the second question for you, if I may, when Sargassum is distilled into liquid, what happens to all the bulk? Is it good for other purposes? And yeah, there's two people asked that. They're particularly for liquid fertilizers. What do the producers do with the waste? Because it's probably going to be a lot of it.
Well, there's different options. Again, it depends on the composition of the sargassum and what is extracted and what is left. But a lot of people, what they are considering is to use this for animal fodder. Can use it to make paper, so the biomass that's residual can be used for different purposes.
Okay, thanks very much. Right, now your second round of questions. So Brigitte, these are two questions about habitats other than beaches, one about mangroves, one about corals. Someone's been looking at the impacts of sargassum accumulation on fringing mangroves. Have you any experience with mortality to mangroves due to sargassum brown tides? This person is keeping an historical database using satellite images and have a couple of sites seeing mortality on mangrove ecosystems. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, very interesting. I think it's another affected system. In Mexico, well, we have seen leaf loss of mangroves. Whether they're actually dead, it's another issue. We don't know that yet. Usually, mangroves, the first reaction is to lose leaves, and they can keep it a long time, and then they suddenly revive again. But very interesting. And there's a student, a Dutch student, actually, of a Dutch university. I'm almost advisory committer, who's actually studying the effect on the physiology of mangroves. So it will be very interesting if the person who asked the question and him would get in touch, at least to collaborate more widely on the fact, because I think that's another studied impact until now.
That's great, because I think it's one of the functions of this webinar series is not just to give information back and forth, but there's a bit of matchmaking as well. So if we can do a bit of matchmaking, that would be great. Now the question was about coral ecosystems. How far have you gone with the research on the effect of sargassum in coral habitats?
Well, what my lab has done is basically see how far the impact of, for example, eutrophication, water quality loss goes far out, how far to the coast. And that's, well, we measured still an impact at 2 kilometers where the coral reefs are. And then there are other colleagues who actually study the coral reefs. And unfortunately, in Mexico, 2018, 2019, it suffered a massive loss of live coral, more than 50%. Some might even have gone extinct and to dry, for example, due to a disease, which is called rapid coral tissue loss or white syndrome. And my colleagues think that this disease, because it could catch on so quickly on the corals along the whole Mexican coral reef fringing reef system, basically is due to the loss of water quality and due to the massive influxes of sargassum. Of course, the direct relationship is not there, but it's there. Other colleagues, and for example, in Colegio de Frontera Sur in the southern Mexico, they have found that, for example, the movement of the coral larvae are changed when they're exposed to exudates of sargassum. So they don't move as far, which may have consequences for new settlements or connectivity. So there are a lot of impacts we don't see yet, which really require long-term study to really understand what's happening.
Thank you very much. Did I ask you your two questions? Yes, I did. Okay, thank you. Anyway, I have a question here about can you use satellite data in nearshore, shallow waters, to monitor or map dead, sunken sargassum? How much penetration do you get with some of the sensors you can get access to?
For current observations, we don't have that capacity to for the nearshore regions because of the COROS resolution and satellite we're using. But right now we're developing high resolution images to apply for this region, and we will be able to have that capacity soon to monitor this nearshore sargassum. Yeah.
So when you say high resolution, what sort of scales are we talking about for the pixels?
Like 10 meters, 20 meters, 30 meters.
Right. Yeah. Okay, that sounds very interesting. And then your next question then is, you showed your predictions, your predictive model of passage. Do you have any inputs of temporal changes in nutrients into this at all? What sort of model is it, you know, or could you benefit from linking up to a model which did have those additional drivers in?
Right now, we are still doing some tests, and the model I'm showing right now did not input that component. So the results I'm showing in the previous slides is not including the nutrient component. But we have other models that are trying to incorporate the other factors, like the sea surface temperature, salinity even, and also the nutrient composition into that model as well. And we have seen that by including the nutrient component, we can get some performance gains for the predictability of the model. So we are still developing that.
Thank you, because in fact there were two questions and they both specified major river inputs in the South Atlantic. So that's be both from the West Africa and South America side. So that sounds like work in progress, which is good. Anne, a slightly controversial, not controversial question, but they're challenging you here. Why would people bother to make, it says AC, I'm not quite sure what that is, from Sargassum when banana leaves and coconut shells are more abundant, not salted, and less arsenic?
That's a good question. Well, we have so much Sargassum that we have to find, there's a lot of biomass, so we have to find some uses. And there's a lot of research going on to see the properties of Sargassum in activated carbon. And we're actually in the Caribbean, we are importing a lot of activated carbon to filter out water and sewage plants and so forth. So instead of importing all that activated carbon, we could produce it locally.
Yeah, fine, thank you. And the other question again was about uses, but this is from Côte d'Ivoire. If somebody wanted to harvest Sargassum, what would be the best methodology and the mode of conservation of this material for better future use? So someone's collecting it and then is going to use it at some later stage.
Yes, I think it's also important to develop storage of Sargassum. There's a great opportunity that's being developed in Mexico, and processing the Sargassum directly on the boat. So they're removing Brigitte could talk more about it, but they're removing the water content of the Sargassum and they're compressing it to ease the storage. And then they are talking as well to develop a Sargassum park, industrial park if you want. So all the Sargassum would be brought over there and processed, and then you could purchase your part of Sargassum the way you need it to develop your different use. So there's different initiatives that are being not implemented yet, but they are being looked at.
Great, thank you very much. Yes, right. I think we have time for our final round of questions. This is to do with the impact of seaweed accumulation on beaches in terms of their nutrient inputs. So there's someone with experience of looking at kelp beaching in Scotland and observing that where you have beaches where kelp accumulates, you get increased ecosystem complexity compared with beaches where it doesn't. Now, in former times, before you got these enormous inundations, do you know what the impact of Sargassum would have been? Would it have had some beneficial effect?
Well, small quantities do have a beneficial effect. And if there's a small quantity of debris on the beach, organic, usually it's seagrasses in the Caribbean, we have had occasional small inundations of Sargassum from the original Sargassum Sea in Mexico, at least, and they were never a problem. And I think they may be beneficial. Nobody has really properly looked into it, but I've seen studies from other areas. And of course, if you put some fiber and organic carbon in a sand, it makes it more cohesive. There's more fauna, more birds eating it. So it's a more diverse ecosystem. But it's all a matter of quantity, of course. So if it's getting in small quantities, it's fine. So which is the other reason why I'm usually saying, well, if you don't have tourists and there arrives a little bit of sargassum or sea crust or anything on your beach, please leave it there. It's good. But it's only when there arrives too much.
Yeah. Your next question is a technical one about the experiments you did with nutrient addition. You saw lower growth when you added phosphorus to cage sargassum. What do you think is the reason for the reduced growth?
Well, we didn't just add phosphorus. It was just a general fertilizer, so NPK basically. And well, I think sargassum has its optimal. It's a species. The pelagic sargassum are a species adapted to live in oligotrophic environments. They're originally from original Sargasso Sea, which is incredibly nutrient poor, so they have a really high efficiency of uptake when the concentrations are low. And then, of course, when the concentrations gets higher, they don't convert into growth anymore. And then others may benefit. So maybe possibly there were more diatoms attached and which block the light, and their sargassum grew less. We still have to look into it. These were preliminary experiments. We didn't expect it. We expected, we added a small amount of nutrients, it still grew faster, but if we added more, it started to slow down. And I think basically that's a matter of competition with epiphytes. But we really, these are preliminary. We are setting now a really more decent growth experiment. So I hope we will have some answers in the future, in the near future.
Fine, thank you. I think we're about down to one question each now, otherwise I'll get into serious trouble. But there are several questions, on the West African situation, about where does the fluitons and natans found on the West African coast come from? Like somebody would like to know more about the ocean currents responsible for transporting to the weed. And then a technical question is, how do you get around the heavy cloud cover off West Africa? Because that must be an issue.
Okay, so the first question, for the entire Central Atlantic region is actually collected by the ocean circulation. There is a recirculation zone that the ocean currents can push from by the equatorial caverns to the Caribbean coast, to the West Africa coast. So that's definitely ocean current driven. And most of the sargassum in the Central Atlantic can be pushed into different regions across different sites. And so that's the source of the one important source of the West Africa seaweed. And also there are some local growth over this area as well. The ocean is connected all over the place. And the second question, how to minimize the impact of the clouds. So for the cloud pixels, we mark them out. We don't consider them, but they are, because the clouds are not statistic, they will move. So if we do a monthly mean data products, we're able to get maybe like 10 points out of a month. Then we can average the 10 valid points for that pixel. So that may give us a relatively reliable estimations of how much sargassum is in that region. So that's how we tackle the problems of clouds. Yeah. Okay,
you're kind of filtering them out by some sort of digital magic. That sounds great.
Yeah, because we simply cannot obtain any information from the clouds, from the optical sensor. But SAR sensor will be different.
Right, I'm going to have thank you very much. I'm going to have a final question to Anne, which is a simple one, I think. How do people get hold of the Sargasso guide?
Oh, well, it will be, we're finishing up now, and so probably by next month it will be available.
Great.
So we will send a link, and it will be available free for everyone that's interested in viewing it. You can go to the CERMES University of the West Indies website. There will be a link available.
Brilliant. Well, look, thank you all, three speakers. You've been great, and putting it with me as well. And I'm going to hand back now to Joanna, just to remind everybody that you will be able to have a chance to see the discussion and the presentations again, because the session's being recorded. So Joanna, back to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Peter. That was very interesting, questions, and the answers have also been given very well and to the point. Thank you. So finally, we're going to go into some conclusions, and I would like to invite Caesar and Lisa and Hartwig, if Hartwig is still around.
I am.
Yeah, okay. So thank you, Anne and Brigitta. If you can turn off your cameras, I'll be very grateful, because we can't take more than 6. Thank you. So we want some conclusions to all of this. It's been very interesting. Indeed, science can simplify things, and science can give us many, solutions. Imagine the unending list of the uses. That's what has really fascinated me. But anyway, there's more to it than just using it. So I'll first invite Caesar to give us some conclusions and perhaps a way forward. Just to mention that we are looking at using these inputs in a white paper, and so whatever we have as conclusions from this, we will use some of it to build on the white paper, which will eventually be part of the Open Science meeting. Thank you. Caesar, you have the floor. Thank you.
Gracias a todos todos los panelistas, porque sé que tenemos una gran audiencia que habla directamente la lengua española. Entonces, bienvenidos y esperamos que sigan así. Merci beaucoup à tous les gens qui nous suivent, spécialement de la Côte d'Ivoire et aussi de Caraïbes. I would like to thank all of you, and also our participants from Spanish and French speaking as well. Is extremely important, because one of the interesting aspects of science is that it's a multilingual, and science is a forum for us to move and to progress. I would like to stress after the presentations the rich content of the presentations, and is, as we started by saying, is just showing us the main challenges that we have, that they are not trivial. It's extremely a good number of questions that you could see that they are not answered, and we are working in. So I would expect this to go forward, and there is one point that I would like to stress, is the importance of sharing the experience and strengthening the partnerships. Here, science and the need to strengthen the network of experts working on the issue is extremely important. This we have, as we started here, and the organizer of the meeting, we have a series already of UN organizations, regional organizations, NGOs, etc., that are working on the issue. That is extremely important to keep us together working and strengthen our partnerships. Secondly, is that evidently we will need to have moved forward into a more comprehensive meeting. That is one of the, I am quite sure Elisa and other my colleagues will stress that, but I will stress here the importance of having the next meeting dedicated of the science for Sargassum. And as mentioned by Joanna, we are looking forward to develop the so-called white paper that will be like the guidance in order to move forward on the content of the science, Sargassum science. And by discussing that, I would like to point out that the importance of the UN Decade for Ocean Science, of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, that will start next year, and how all the work that we are doing here and the progress on the science meeting, as well as whatever we are going to put into that white paper, the importance to link that into how we can progress and go into establishing a program within the framework of the UN Decade for Sargassum, science of Sargassum. So I would like to encourage all of you to think about how we can organize and put forward within the framework of that of the UN Decade for Ocean Science, and stress as well the importance of the interregional experience, sharing the experience in order to move forward and provide science policy making and legislation, and as well as to as a contribution to the economic development of our member states. Thank you, and I will encourage all of you to go to the website and also to keep this network that, of the all attendees alive, and please connect among yourself via the different websites of IOC and UNEP and the others. Thank you, Anna. I hope you will have a very productive next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Cesar. Indeed, thank you for those very important comments you have out there. Next, I will invite Elisa. Elisa is coming in now. She has been with us in the previous webinar, and she's a researcher at the Institute of Marine Sciences in Barcelona, Spain. And she's part of the IOC-UNESCO and the SCORE program on the global harmful algal bloom. Elisa, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joanna. And thank you very much, all the speakers, all the audience, all the panelists, all the organizers that made possible this webinar today. And as representing Global Hub, just a point is that the term of harmful algal blooms, it's an anthropogenic term, in the sense that the humanity perceives something as harmful to us, harmful in terms of health, human health, in terms of ecosystem disturbances, economic impacts, and this is why we are interested in Sargassum. But at the same time, this human perspective sometimes made us to be a little bit apart from the point made by Brigitta that we are dealing with a natural phenomena that has positive aspects. And originally, this was a refuge for fishes, a biodiversity a network, and paradise, I would say, in the old terms. And it's telling us that something is happening to the planet. And at the same time, it is offering us an opportunity of coordination, as it has been summarized by Cesar. Coordination from of different disciplines, trying to see answers to the questions posed by satellites. We go to, but who is there? Is this a species? Is the other species? Is it alive? Is it not alive? What are the drivers? So we see in the case of the Sargassum, this need of integrating different disciplines, different scales, different organisms. We were recently listening to one of the questions that were talking about epiphytes, diatoms. So this is the complexity of nature, and together we will try to move forward, and hopefully we'll be having an open science meeting, and otherwise through those series of webinars, I think we are highlighting all the effort done in different parts of the world. And in the next webinar, we'll be mainly focusing in West Africa. So, well, I would not add anything else of the important ideas that have been indicated in this webinar today, and thank you again.
Thank you very much, Elisa. Thank you indeed for all your hard work behind the scenes in getting this webinar going. Thank you. Hartwig.
Yeah, thanks very much for giving me the floor again. And first of all, thanks very much to the speakers. And as I said in the very beginning, in my opening, I said I count that I can learn something today, and I did. So that was really a successful webinar for me. It was capacity building at its best. Now, what would I conclude? Sustainability is a matter of time and place. And that was published by John Day, actually, from the University of Louisiana in 2013. And it's about the combination of climate and human consumption and production, energy and monetary fluxes in the US, including the Mississippi and the Gulf. Worth reading. And we've heard about that today as well. It's a matter of where, when, why, and is it predictable? And is it something that's unique? Is it something that's completely new, and will it be maintained, or is it a phenomenon in time that goes away? Those are things that we actually don't really know. What have we learned? We have learned that we need to actually come to a fusion of data and information across satellite information, across in situ information, across remote sensing in the sea, and not to forget the knowledge that's been accumulated on the community level in those areas affected. And if we bring those data together and we are ready to share, then that can indeed be something that Cesar also put forward as some sort of a kind of interregional or even transatlantic collaboration. It's a learning process. And how we can maybe at least temporarily transform this phenomenon of Sargassum into a sustainable blue economy approach, which is currently in every person's mouth, needs to be embedded in a conversation with the small and medium-sized enterprises and science technology innovation. And that's the other lesson learned. It's not just about ecosystem-based management and adaptation, it's also about science and technology, because technology helps us to take advantage of these kind of phenomena and actually create new opportunities, particularly for coastal communities. And I see that very strongly embedded here. So data sharing, information sharing, cross-cultural and cross-sectoral learning, I think, are the key messages I'll take home from here. And the decade was mentioned. I think the decade for ocean sciences is the platform that gives us really a wide field of bringing the science to utility for the people and for the policy-making process. And now, as a concerned citizen, not as UNEP, I keep asking myself, actually, what are we going to do with another phenomenon that's actually generated by the oceans, which is the locust crisis in East Africa? Shouldn't we think about striking back and putting them into protein for food or animal feeding? I mean, that's 60% of protein and good fat. So we need to think about that. It's really something that we need to realize as new opportunities and putting threats and risks into opportunities. So with these words, I would like to again say thank you to this really useful webinar and wish it to be succeeded with a focus on West Africa. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Hartwig. Thank you, Elisa, and thank you, Cesar. Indeed, you have put some very good conclusions to this discussion. And you see, there's no end to science. We have learned a lot, we have heard a lot, and we are not yet there, because we started off by thinking what is actually causing this sargassum? What are the factors that are being attributed to the sargassum bloom? And amongst other things, some of the issues, the factors that were raised were the ocean is warming, is due to global climate change, is due to the discharge of micronutrients, particularly nitrogen and phosphorus from agricultural runoff and wastewater, which is originating, of course, from land, from point sources, looking at major rivers such as the Amazon and the Congo. It could also be the deposition of iron, nutrients, and rich dust from the Sahara into the ocean. These are some of the things that came up first, but you see, we are not yet there. So like you say, we are learning a lot about the science to eventually see which one of these will actually fit Because like as curious human beings, we want to actually see exactly what is causing this. Along the line, we are getting a lot of useful information. We are looking at how we'll be able to network and how we will turn the impact into a more positive than thing. Perhaps the Decade of Oceans, which is going to start next year, promises to answer all the questions that we have about the ocean. So we can put it there. But then we will continue with these webinars and also see what we can get from the regions. The next one we will be focusing on West Africa, and then the next one we focus on the Caribbean. So eventually, when we enter the decade, we will have something substantive. Or maybe next year we can have this open science meeting, which eventually, when it happens, it promises to be very, very interesting. And on that note, I would like to thank all the speakers. Thank you very much for your very interesting input and sharing your knowledge and the science research that you have done over the years with us. Thanks to the participants. We still have about 200 participants online, which shows how much interest this subject is generating. And thanks to all the organizers, and I wish you all the best even as we approach the end of another week. Thank you very much and goodbye. Goodbye.
Thanks to everybody and stay healthy. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Stay safe and healthy.
Hasta la
See you
próxima.
soon, Harvard.
Yes.
A la próxima.
Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye.
A la próxima.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Nos vemos pronto, Harvard.
Sí.